I'm Melissa Franklin. I teach in physics department. And this is our research lecture series. It hasn't been so strong in terms of the number of people this year, but the talks have been unbelievable. So I am very happy to introduce Krzysztof Gajos. Apparently his name isn't actually pronounced like that, but he wouldn't let me try to pronounce it correctly. Anyway, he's a guy. He's from Poland. He's an associate professor here in the computer science department. He started at MIT in computer science, where he got his bachelor's and his master's of engineering. And then he went to UW, University of Washington, for his PhD. And then was at Microsoft for a year before becoming a professor here at Harvard. And he's also interesting because he taught in Africa. He actually taught at the Ashisi University in Accra, Ghana. That was pretty cool. So he taught artificial intelligence there. And he teaches some weird things here. I'm not really sure what they are, but something about adaptive technologies. And he's going to tell us about it today. I just met him on the street, but sorry, I'm just kidding. But no, he really is a professor here. And I think he's going to be, I think he's going to be a really, give a really good talk. So let's welcome him.
One, two, three. All right, I'm in. Hello. So my name actually is Krzysztof, not Krzysztof. And if you look at how it's spelled, it doesn't help. This is how you say it. But still, it works best after a beer or a glass of wine. For now, you can call me Krzysztof. I teach computer science. I started as a proper computer scientist working with numbers. I specialized in artificial intelligence, and somewhere along the way, I discovered people. At first, I discovered people as a major annoyance because they wouldn't use the things that I've built the way I wanted them to use them. And eventually, I discovered that people had limitations, interests, preferences, and that these things were actually quite interesting, and that it might potentially be interesting to understand them so that we can build systems that succeed despite the fact that people have limitations, focuses, preferences, and interests that may be different from what I anticipate. So I apprenticed with a cognitive psychologist at Microsoft Research and gradually became more and more interested in people and how they use technology. And right now, I'm in an area of computer science known as human-computer interaction. So half of the days I wake up thinking about algorithms, and the other half of the days I wake up thinking about people, and I blend the two together. So today I would like to talk to you about one of the major ills in design of interactive systems, namely the fact that our prevalent approach to designing interactive systems is one size fits all. Unlike in architecture and several other fields where we do recognize that people differ from one another and we tend to have multiple solutions to the same problem, in software we tend to have a single solution, and I'm going to try to convince you that that solution inadvertently but inevitably tends to systematically discriminate against some people. I'll give you 3 examples. But before I go to that, just to get us warmed up and just to illustrate the evils of one-size-fits-all design, let me present you with one specific design. The Swiss Army knife. It's iconic, it's beautiful, it's wonderful. We all love it, we all use it as an example when we want to illustrate something that is simple yet incredibly powerful. I've owned one for many years, and it served me very well. I could use it for almost anything I needed, until, as a graduate student, I was fortunate to go to a conference in Florence, Italy. I got a room in a cheap but wonderful hotel that had a rooftop overlooking the entire city. So one day, I invited all of my friends, bought several bottles of Chianti. We all piled up onto the roof deck, and we discovered that nobody had a corkscrew. So next time I went to a conference, I was much better prepared. However, on my way to the airport, my luggage broke. And to repair it, I needed a Phillips screwdriver. So when I returned from that trip, somehow, having repaired the luggage temporarily along the way, I contacted the, Victorinox and told them about my problem, and they told me, don't worry, several other people have called us with their problems, we've got a solution. And that served me well, though more and more I tended to leave the thing at home rather than take it with me. And when I checked in a little bit later, they had another upgrade. You can get one too if you want to. So this progression of successive improvements is something that we've seen in many different situations. The kind of annoying thing or disappointing thing is that most of us really want something at this level of complexity, but most of us want something slightly different. So what you want may be a little bit different from what I want, but we all want something roughly at this levels of complexity, but because we differ from one another, the one-size solution when it emerges looks something like this. So I chose the Swiss Army knife because it was kind of a very drastic perversion of the original idea, but obviously this concept of one size fits all resulting in feature bloat and unusable artifacts is very pervasive in my own field. So for now, the main thesis of my talk can be summarized as one size fits all design is evil, and I'll try to make it a little bit more nuanced as I go along. So I would like to present you with 3 very specific examples of where one size fits all design inadvertently discriminates against people, and then I'll try to synthesize all of these findings. So let us get started. People with motor impairments. I've worked quite a lot with people with motor impairments, both severe and milder. One of the people that I've worked with was Ken. What you see on the picture is his chin resting on a trackball. Ken was born with spastic cerebral palsy, so he has very little intentional control over any of his limbs. His speech is also impaired, so he cannot use voice recognition software. So he controls the mouse pointer by using his chin on a trackball, and he's got a wand attached to his forehead with which he pecks on the computer keyboard. Despite these very severe impairments, Ken got a degree in computer science and actually runs his own computer science consultancy. However, because he's roughly 3 times slower using computers than his able-bodied peers, he works much longer hours and still has many fewer clients than he would otherwise. And despite having an incredibly marketable skill, he lives in a trailer home. Another person I worked with was Claire. Claire has muscular dystrophy, which means severe muscle weakness. She can perform many operations very accurately. However, she needs both of her hands just to move the mouse. Her range of motion and her strength are incredibly limited. When you look at how Claire can use computers, they're both much slower than their peers. But when you look at the details, when Ken uses computers, he's actually very fast, except for a few situations where he uses interactors like these ones, where there are tiny, tiny little arrows that you have to click on very precisely. This is when he slows down. He also slows down on these pull-down menus because you have to open a tab, then open a submenu, and then eventually click. So if you make any mistake along the way, you have to go back and start from scratch. All of these other things, like buttons, even checkboxes, he's perfectly fine with. It's just a small fraction of the interactors that really get in the way and cause him to be several times slower than his able-bodied peers. When you look at Claire, she's actually very accurate. She can operate all of the little interactors throughout the user interface. Where she gets stuck is when she has to move all the way from the buttons over here to the tabs over there. When she has to perform these large motions all across the user interface, this is where she becomes much slower than everybody else. So these examples demonstrate a few very important points. One of them is that the difficulties that the two of them experience when using computers are not inherent to their condition. It's not that people with severe motor disabilities, severe motor impairments, cannot be efficient using computers. It's just that there is a mismatch between what the designer assumed and what these people can do. Ken can make very fast, large movements, just cannot acquire very small targets. Claire can make can be incredibly accurate in her movements, just cannot perform large movements. Right? So these people, in principle, can be very efficient with computers if we designed around their abilities rather than designing for somebody with a different set of abilities. The second thing that becomes very apparent here is that the sets of abilities, the superpowers that Ken and Claire have, are very different. So there is no such thing as a disability design, one that will fit all people with impairments. They all have to be taken individually. And in fact, when we look at people with motor impairments, even people with very similar medical diagnoses often have very different actual sets of abilities. So we cannot stereotype, we really have to treat these people as individuals. So the situations that arises here is that not only do we need more than one design, it looks like we need a separate design for every individual with substantially interesting motor impairments. So that means lots and lots of designs. We probably cannot have that many designers generating that many different designs, and often we cannot even anticipate what these people will need. So as a computer scientist, I thought that perhaps the right thing to do would be to automate the process. Could we automate design? Well, we could start by trying to understand what design is. I tried to, I talked to my engineering colleagues to try to understand how they conceptualize design. And they thought of it as a process in which you come up with a problem, specify it, you give it to an incredibly smart person, and a week later, something interesting comes out. This conceptualization of design is actually quite pervasive, and in design literature is often referred to as design by genius. Meanwhile, if you actually ask a designer how they go through the design process, they tell a different story. They tell a story in which they first articulate a large number of possible solutions, trying to understand what's possible in this space. Then they start to understand what's good, what's bad, how do I evaluate these things, and then they slowly narrow down the set of options that they want to work with until they identify 1, 2, or 3 that they want to take to the next stage. So this is design by exploration. And as a computer scientist or an engineer, I immediately begin to recognize it as optimization. So optimization is a process in which you articulate all possible options. You come up with some way of quantifying the goodness of each of the options, and you come up with some clever mechanism of searching through all of these options very, very quickly. And the way our design friends described the design process, it really looked like it could be operationalized as optimization, which is something that we as computer scientists have superpowers to perform. Some thorny questions remain. So how do we evaluate a design? How do we know whether a design is good or not? And then, given that there are many possible designs, how do we find the best one quickly? So the first question really is, what makes for a good design? And it really depends on the design's purpose. And in my work with people with severe motor impairments, it became very clear that the main differentiator of good versus bad design was how quickly they could accomplish their task. So if design was good for them, they could get their job done quickly. If it was bad, they would get bogged down and spend hours on something that was very simple. So we could really simplify our evaluation of goodness of a user interface by saying, how quickly can this person perform a set of typical tests with this design? The design that allows them to perform typical tasks the fastest is the winner. So we borrowed from ideas from psychology, from 1950s psychologists, where Paul Fitts created a numerical model that allows us to predict how quickly people will perform basic movements in 2 dimensions. We adapted this model to work with people with severe impairments. And for each of these people, we would start by presenting them with a set of very simple computed tasks. We would log and track their performance. And out of that, we would build a personal model of what this person could do. And then we would use it as a way of evaluating each of the possible solutions. So that's great. We have a way of distinguishing a bad solution from a good solution. Now all we have to do is look through all possible user interfaces and find the best. So here's the other problem. Even for relatively simple applications that I was looking at, there were up to 10 to the 17 different possible designs for every application. And just to make it clear, 10 to the 17 is a very big number. If we were to test even 1 million different designs per second, we would need over 3,000 years to evaluate all of these designs. So that's job security, but that's perhaps not what's desirable if you really want to make sure that Ken and Claire, anytime they want to use a new application, that they immediately have a design that they can work with. So here's where computer science comes to the rescue. So many people think of computer science as the art of programming. So programming is to computer science the way holding a hammer and a chisel is to sculpture. Computer science is really about understanding the abstraction, understanding how to compute something that is in practice not computable. So something that would take you 3,000 years if you wanted to do it naively, can we find a way that we can still find the answer without sacrificing the quality, but in time that is reasonable. So computer science is all about coming up with this a clever trick, an understanding of the problem that allows us to shave many orders of magnitude from the speed, and then coding it up is just the last step. It's the chisel and the hammer. So there are two very powerful tricks in computer science. The branch and bound algorithm allows us to throw away things that are provably worse than what we've found already, and full constraint propagation for these types of problems allow us to throw away solutions that are provably useless, because, for example, because they wouldn't fit on the screen. So we went down from 3,000 years per solution to less than a second. Sorry, let me go back. So what you see here is the system redoing a user interface in response to change in the window size. And you can see that new user interface is being computed in a second or less. So this is what we're able to accomplish. So now really when Ken and Claire encounter a new application, they want to use a new program on the internet or elsewhere, they really can be presented with a personalized user interface at interactive speeds. And this approach is very versatile. It allows us to generate user interfaces of varying complexity and for a variety of different platforms. So how well did it work for them? Here is a user interface reproduced from popular software. And we asked our system to generate different versions specifically for Ken and Claire. So the system first measured their performance on a set of tasks and then automatically generated user interfaces that it predicted would be the fastest for the two of them to use. So this is what Ken's user interface looked like. Notice that all of the interactors are larger, so it's easier for Ken to click them, but there is a trade-off. So the larger the spacing that there is between items in a list, the easier they are to click, but the more need for scrolling. And scrolling is actually very difficult for Ken. So the system had to find a trade-off between making individual items clickable and reducing the amount of scrolling. In contrast, the design for Claire looks very, very different. So while for Ken, the user interface was split across 3 different panes that were accessible through the tabs at the bottom, for Claire, everything is in a single screen. Everything is small, requires a lot of scrolling, and she's perfectly fine with that as long as she doesn't have to make too many large movements. So she no longer has to go all the way to the top to switch between panes. She's much faster. So again, if you look at these designs side by side, you can see that the design that the system generated for Ken is great for him, but would be a disaster for Claire, and vice versa. So we need personalized designs, and there's no such thing as a single disability design. We need to treat these people as individuals with their own idiosyncratic needs, abilities, and preferences. So when we looked at the actual performance, the bar on the left shows you how much time people with severe impairments needed with today's user interfaces. The bar on the left shows you how much time able-bodied people needed with the same user interfaces. And with the personalized adaptive user interfaces, we're able to cut more than half of this performance gap between people with motor impairments and able-bodied people. So now I'm able to articulate my punchline in a little bit more sophisticated manner than before. So it's not just that one-size-fits-all design sucks. The current discourse in accessibility is about making access possible, just about making it in any way possible for people with all sorts of differences in abilities to access a digital resource. I argue that something much stronger is needed. We need to make access equitable. What I didn't tell you is that Claire was a student at the university. She was able to use all of the software in her classes, but very, very slowly. The consequence was that if she took full load of classes, her grades suffered because she wasn't able to finish all of the assignments on time. If she took fewer courses, she was able to do well, but she wouldn't be able to finish her degree before her financial aid expired. So she wouldn't be able to actually complete her degree. So in either way, she was professionally disadvantaged, not because she lacked the capability to be a good student, but because she didn't have equitable access to the tools that she needed to be a student. So the second point that I want to make is that right now, for people who differ from the designer's expectations, we require those people to adapt themselves to the designs that we create. I argue that the user interfaces and the systems that we create should share the burden of adaptations and meet the users halfway and make sure that they reflect what the people can do well. So in the one-size-fits-all world, we all use exactly the same user interfaces, and some people systematically get left out. In the adaptive world, in the personalized world, we all get user interfaces that respond to the superpowers that each one of us has. So this is story number one. I would like to move to a story number two, which is about color vision deficiencies, and a story that is perhaps a little bit more lighthearted, but illustrates the point from a different angle. So people with color vision deficiencies have difficulty telling some colors apart. So there are probably some people in this audience who cannot tell that in this part of the user interface, there are messages and that they alternate in color. Some are presented in red and some are presented in green. And the two different colors are supposed to allow us to see that these are successive separate messages. People with red-green color blindness will see this, the screen like this, with everything kind of appearing grayish green. There are tools that automatically will recolor any color image in such a way that the color-encoded information is, again, accessible to a person with a color vision deficiency. So if we use an existing color tool, a recoloring tool, this is what it will give us. We can now see this color-encoded information over here. We can see the alternating colors in this presentation, but we seem to have lost something. Color is used in design not just for encoding information. It is used to convey a mood, to convey emotional meaning that is becoming more and more important. In this recoloring, this emotional meaning is entirely lost. The red luscious lips is about warmth, it's about romance, it's about, well, those things. What you see over here is more like Arctic kiss of death, right? This entire emotional content, everything that we encoded in the color in the original design is gone, and not just gone, it's in fact reversed. We get exactly the opposite effect. So this tool makes access to the information possible, but it doesn't make it equitable in that people with color vision deficiencies do not get the same kind of an experience as people with regular color vision. So we wanted to change this, and we wanted to create a system that would recolor in such a way that it recognizes that people with color vision deficiencies see fewer colors, but as much as possible, we would like to recolor the images in such a way that they convey both the information and the mood of the original design. So how do we go about recoloring an image? So the way we think of this problem, again, is an optimization. So we take an original image, we think about all of the colors that an individual with a color vision deficiency is capable of seeing, and then we try to find the mapping from the images from the colors that this person can see, from the colors in the image to the colors that the person can see. We want to do it in such a way that the colors that are differentiable in the original image are differentiable in the recolored image, and as much as possible, we would like to preserve the original colors. This is what the naturalness is about. So we expanded this process, and we added, we also wanted to capture people's subjective response to color. We wanted to somehow quantify how people react to color and ability to preserve this subjective response in the recolorings that we create. So we found very interesting work in perceptual psychology that actually quantified and captured and modeled how people emotionally respond to color. It turns out that it all boils down to 3 dimensions. We can think of colors at the, on the scale of activity, from passive to very active, from cold to warm, and from light to heavy. And if we're able to reproduce those responses, then we're essentially able to reproduce all of the other emotional responses that people have to color. But these studies were conducted with people with regular color vision. And the question, of course, was, will people with reduced color vision ability be able to have the same emotional responses as the rest of us? So we conducted studies, and indeed we confirmed that even though these people see a much smaller gamut of colors, they have the same emotional responses to those colors that they can see as the people with regular color vision. And we've built a system that recolors images, not only making the color-encoded information accessible, but also preserving the mood. So this is a sample image that we might want to recolor. This is what a person with color vision deficiencies would see. Existing recolorer would capture the contrast, but our recolorer would also capture the mood. When we conducted studies, we were as good as the competition at preserving the differentiability of the color-encoded information, but we preserved the mood much better than previous systems. So kind of to capture it again, prior systems focused on making information, access to the information possible. Our system tried to make the access to the information equitable. People perceive the color-encoded information and see what the information was there, but also what was the designer's emotional intent. And the last story that I wanted to tell you is perhaps the most surprising because it seems most innocuous, but we think that it actually has a very large effect because of how incredibly widespread it is. So I'm going to argue that the fact that we perceive different things to be beautiful actually impacts our ability to succeed in the digital world. And here is the argument. Before the argument, there's going to be a quiz. Pay attention to the screen. You will be presented with a design for just half a second. I'll ask you a question about this design after you see it. Okay. How many of you perceive this design as aesthetically pleasing? How many of you would be willing to make a purchase from a website that looked like this with your own credit card? Okay, thank you, Peregrine. Another one, pay attention. Okay, how many of you found this design aesthetically pleasing? How many of you would be willing to make a purchase on a website that looked like this? Okay, so what exactly your response was doesn't matter, but what matters is the fact that you had different responses. You didn't see the content of these websites, you only saw them for half a second, but you created a lasting and a very strong impression, not only of how aesthetically pleasing the site was, but also of whether or not it was trustworthy. So our immediate impression of aesthetic appeal very strongly impacts our perception of trustworthiness. It also naturally impacts our willingness to engage with a particular digital resource, but there's even more. Whether or not we perceive something as beautiful impacts whether or not we are going to be successful with it. There were very interesting studies conducted first in Japan and then in Israel, where people were presented with two designs, that were functionally identical. They had the same buttons, the same labels, everything else. But one design was designed to be aesthetically pleasing, and the other one was not. People who worked with the aesthetically pleasing design were much faster and committed fewer errors than people who worked with the ugly design. We think that one of the reasons for it is because of what affect does to us. So when we feel happy, We are much more exploratory, so when we encounter an error, we are much more likely to try something new and recover from the error. If we are feeling subdued, depressed, negative, when we encounter an error, we keep trying the same thing over and over again, roughly the way we interact with Microsoft products. So notice what's happening over here. If we perceive something as beautiful, we trust it, we engage, we are successful. If we perceive something as ugly, we don't trust it, we don't engage. And even if we do engage, we are less likely to succeed. So now the question is, do we all perceive the same things as beautiful? There's probably an intuitive answer to it, but we want it as a more systematic answer. So we've built an online laboratory so that we could conduct this study with a large number of people from all around the world and from all sorts of different demographics. We've created a tool called Lab in the Wild, and you are very welcome to access it after this talk, labinthewild.org. And we've, by now, there are about a dozen different studies there, but we started with just one. And we conducted a study with 40,000 people who gave us 25 million ratings on several hundred different websites. And we tried to characterize what people perceive as aesthetically pleasing. So we looked at the different designs that people saw and characterized them in terms of visual complexity. And unexpectedly, we like things that are not too simple and not too complex. So things that are just in the middle, these are the things that on average we tend to perceive as most pleasing. There's a similar story with colorfulness. Things that are too bland or too colorful, on average, we tend to perceive as not as pleasing as those that are just in the middle, just right. But when we separate these results by demographics, very interesting things tend to emerge. So first, there are some very interesting results that reflect our intuitive national stereotypes. So for example, as you increase color in a design, Germans begin to feel rather uncomfortable. But not so people from Chile. It seems that you cannot give them enough color. There are apparently also detrimental effects of higher education. The more formal education we acquire, the more boring we become. And this is, I think, controlling for age. But now notice these things. Our colleagues down the road and even on this campus work on massive providing online education to people who do not normally have easy access to formal education, right? We create MOOCs on the assumption that the people who will most benefit from them are the people who are currently in countries or communities where they do not have access to formal education. But notice the visual design that we are doing. The visual design that we've come up with for these resources appeals primarily to educated Westerners. So we are making these resources aesthetically pleasing and more likely to aesthetically appeal to people who already have a lot of access to formal education. And we seem to be systematically discriminating against people who do not yet have access to formal education. Look at another example. These two websites were liked by women way more than by men in our study. And these two websites were liked much more by men than by women. Notice that the sites that were liked much more by men than by women, both of these websites are resources that computer scientists use to either learn programming or to reference as they program. So again, the resources that are kind of daily part of being a computer scientist appeal to men much more to women. So kind of with a slight nudge, we systematically make women a little bit less likely to trust, engage with, and succeed with resources that are kind of part and parcel of being a computer scientist. So inadvertently, we end up discriminating against the people that we really, really want to attract to our field. So with these stories, let me synthesize. We all want relatively simple designs, but we want different simple designs. And in an adaptive world, we all could have simple tools, physical or digital, that would do precisely what we want. But with our one-size-fits-all design culture, this becomes a little bit less likely, and we eventually end up with tools that are essentially useless to all of us. in a one-size-fits-all design, we systematically discriminate against people with unusual abilities. We design for people with average abilities, and people with unusual abilities, even though they do have things that they can do very well, we expect those other abilities of them, which they do not have, and we expect them to carry the entire burden of adaptation. I'll take questions in just a couple of minutes. In the adaptive design world, I would expect people to work with designs that reflect their needs and abilities and allow them to succeed equitably. If you just make access possible, it may not provide equal and equitable experiences, so focus on all of the aspects of the experience. And with aesthetics, this is just the beginning of our experience with aesthetics. We are now actually trying to see whether individual differences in perception of aesthetics do impact people's perception of trustworthiness, engagement, and success. And we are still looking for the right mechanisms to personalize the aesthetic presentation so that people that we most want to attract to our fields or to particular resources actually do trust, engage with, and succeed with those resources. So I want to leave you with 3 messages. 2 that I have already told you about. One was that when we think about accessibility, it's not just about the possibility of access, but also about making the access equitable. Second is that I believe that the tools that we create should share the burden of adaptation. So when people have idiosyncratic needs, abilities, or preferences, our tools should meet them halfway, at least. And the last thing, which I haven't told you, is articulated by a former student of mine. So a student who was very passionate about the effects of armed conflict that persist in the environment after the conflict is over and harm the civilian communities. He worked on landmine detection and landmine removal. And this is what he told me. While he was at Harvard, he was taking computer science courses because he needed to major in something while he was focusing on fixing the world. But after he built a system, a computer science system, that allowed people in the field to more reliably detect landmines, and he then built a system that allowed people to much faster learn how to be professional deminers, he realized that computer science was the skill that allowed him to make the difference in the world. So while some people may still have the perception of computer science as being a profession that is relegated to cubicles and where people get unhealthy complexions and eat poorly, modern computer science is about going out into the world. We talk to people, we understand people, and we see computer science as a very versatile intellectual toolkit with which we can make real change in the world. So send your sons and daughters to us.
Great. I like that.
Well,
I have a question. Yes. I have a question. Can you do the adaptability with brains?
What do you mean?
Well, not just how well you can use your body, but your brain.
Oh, brain-computer interfaces?
Yeah.
People are working on it, not me, but other people. There's a question right in the back.
Sorry, I'm kind of slow.
Thank you. I really appreciate your ideas and what I take to be your approach. What I'm just curious, I'm wondering how much of some of the problem is not so much, I mean, once you come up with an appropriate design, there would seem to be a problem with, in commercial production, the one-size-fits-all approach seems to be driven by, efficiency in production, and, you sell one thing to as many people as, one pre-cut jeans or whatever you want to, whatever it may be. So how do you understand this problem in the market system of production, and what are some ideas on how to make it feasible for somebody producing wheelchairs to build in design of wheelchairs or whatever it may be that's customizable, or including the kinds of design ideas that you're talking about?
So I'll talk to software because that's
Right.
what I know better. So the system that we've built allowed a person to approach an application that already exists and automatically create an alternative user interface that would be just right for them. There are two problems with making it real. One is that our current software engineering practice makes it very difficult for an alternative user interface to connect to an existing application. So we need to change how we engineer things. But the second is that people who produce software artifacts do not care just about their users succeeding, but they also care about branding, for example. It's very important for them that the design communicates the brand that's right, that it is consistent with the experience of all of the other products, and that it enhances this global experience of their brand. So in order for the approach that I just described to succeed, we need to capture the designers. We need to make them comfortable with the fact that their product will look very differently to different users, yet will preserve the spirit of their design, that those aspects of the design that are super important to them, of the overall experience and appearance, will be preserved so that they maintain a sense of control, even though the software autonomously adapts the experience to every user.
So it's sort of about brand, maybe more than about producing mass production.
Yeah, so when people create products, they create them to sell. And branding and communication and having some control over exactly what the experience is going to be like is very important. And as a ivory tower scientist, I may ignore it for a while, but if I actually want to have an impact on the world, those are the people whose concerns I need to address.
Hi. I was thinking about the aesthetic component of your presentation, and I think one of the ways in which people react to, say, the design of a website is by taking it as information about the concerns of the people who designed it. So if I perceive, let's say, a website as being very masculine or very, let's say it has sort of an ethnic feel to it, like it feels very white or it feels very Latino, I might take that as evidence that the content that I can expect to find there will be well suited to somebody of that background. And I wonder whether the implementation of this kind of design solution would eliminate some of the informational benefit that I get by looking at a website and seeing like, wow, it looks like there was no woman on this design team, or it looks like the people who designed this don't know any Hispanic people, or whatever.
So essentially you're saying that by looking at the aesthetic design, you can the biases of the design team become apparent and that this is valuable information.
Exactly.
True. There is even more. Sometimes perhaps you want to create designs not for who the person is, but who they aspire to be. So maybe having the MOOCs look like they're designed for affluent Westerners, maybe it is the right thing for those people who are seeking free education to become like affluent Westerners. So we actually do not exactly know what the effect of matching the aesthetics is.
The quick question on the legacy issue, where we have so much that humans get used to, and they get used to pull-down menus, they get used to checkboxes and so on. And there's really been very little since Doug Engelbart's first demo and killer demo in '69. Then Apple does Lisa, and then eventually Mac, and Bill Gates rips it off, and we have Windows. But I mean, there's been very little innovation, number one. And then the second part of the question was, what you've got could simply be appended to the existing legacy interfaces everywhere. And you could, just like you can choose your own styles and color schemes you want in a lot of apps, it could just be a product that immediately sits on top of other stuff and modifies the screen. So the first question was legacy. The second question was this coming along and turning legacy into custom.
Okay, so I'm not sure if I understood the second question, but the first one was about apparent lack of progress. So on the one hand, the basic visual design language that we developed nearly 50 years ago endures, and I think it's good because it's good visual language. It's grounded in physical metaphors, but we've also created a number of very new things. So we've created faceted browsing, which is only about 10 years old and is incredibly powerful. We've created on-objects UIs, which are about 20 years old and which are also very powerful. So we are innovating, just very subtly. And what we are doing on mobile devices is also very, very interesting, and it's very new. And some of it is painful just because we haven't yet experienced it. There was a question in the front.
Let's get to the first two cases. The person didn't have strength, and also the one that couldn't make precise movements. And you talked about the 10 to the 17th sort of space. I guess what I'm wondering about is you need a sort of a cadre of people who can help those people. I just wonder how you envision that, because those people who have the deficiencies they can't really make I guess what you're suggesting is that people can actually search that space themselves. And I'm a little bit skeptical about that, and I'm wondering how you respond to it, because everybody just doesn't know the principles of design. You're sort of putting on the user the principles of design. I'm just wondering if that's accurate.
So I think I was being insufficiently clear over there, because, we cannot rely on expertise. If we want to create adaptive solutions for the individuals with unusual abilities, there are lots of them, and they do not have individually access to expertise. So somehow we need to create a solution that will work if it's only them and an inexperienced caregiver. Like with just these people, the solution has to work. So our system will ask a user to go through this one-time set of diagnostic tasks to understand their individual motor abilities. Then every time they encounter a new application, our system will automatically generate a user interface that is predicted to be the fastest for this person. So we actually, when we ran this study, we created two versions of the system. One where the person with disability would be presented with sets of pairs of designs and would be asked, is this design better for you or is this design? So the system would learn from about 40 such interactions what the person with an impairment thought was the best design for them. And the other version of the system would actually measure their abilities objectively and create designs based on the measurement. The designs that based on the measurement were much more successful than those based on the person's own preference. So people, as you said, did not have a particularly good idea of what the right design was for them. They enjoyed being asked, but they actually preferred the interfaces that were generated automatically based on the measurement.
Good evening. I'm a high school teacher, and I also have children who are in middle and high school. And one of the things that's picking up pace very rapidly is the use of the internet, posted homework assignments, Google Docs, cloud-based learning systems, Chromebooks, iPads to access curriculum, to get feedback, to find out what your homework is for tonight. And so I'm curious both if you've done any work specifically on the dominant tools, which are in K-12, which are iOS and Chrome OS, and also sort of what the legal and social issues are there, because there must be disability law that applies to being able to use those tools in an equitable manner.
I'll give myself 30 seconds to find interesting data that I think you might enjoy.
I'll sing.
Take 60.
Okay. So the first thing is that accessibility laws are incredibly weak. They only mandate possibility of access, and only under some special situations. So the current laws are not up with the times. Given that an average student needs many hours of computer time, just the possibility of access is not enough. The access needs to be equitable, otherwise the student is going to fall behind, just because of that. But there's something much more interesting going on when you look at children. We ran a cross-sectional study with 500,000 people looking at motor performance across different age groups. Notice what's happening. I mean, don't worry about the units or the name of the measurement, but notice what's happening in childhood. We become rapidly better throughout our childhood, roughly until mid-teens, and then we very slowly decline. But what this means is that 1 year in childhood is equivalent to about 7 to 10 years of adulthood. So in 1 year of childhood development, I improve in my abilities as much as I later on decline between the age of 40 and 50. Which means that within a single grade, you will have vastly different motor abilities. So if we design tools for children that really rely on, that penalize children on the nuances of their motor performance, on their dexterity, speed, accuracy, we're actually creating inequalities if just the aspects of raw motor performance end up being somehow reflected in the grade and student success. So we need to be incredibly mindful of the fact that a 7-year-old child is like an average 75-year-old adult, that these are people with severe motor impairments that are changing very rapidly, they're getting better, but we need to be very mindful of it when we design software for children. Yes, people are aware of the fact that children have limited dexterity and so on, but I don't think people realize that just how much variability there is even within a single grade.
So sorry. Someone wants to ask the last question, but do you want to ask the penultimate question?
So I really like your work, and I really like how you quote your previous students' word about he wants to use CS as a tool to make the world a better place. And as a former student of yours and as a designer, and what we are always saying is we are designing to make the world a better place. So I was wondering, so what do you think is the better tool to make the world a better place, design or CS?
I say use your superpowers. World is broken in so many different ways. We cannot fix them all. It's depressing if you try to fix all of the ills. Like when you go to the supermarket and you know something about it, it turns out that half of the food is poisonous. When you when you look at how we run our organizations, it turns out that we systematically discriminate against women and people with all sorts of other unusual characteristics. We are broken in so many different ways. Pick one or two of them, acquire deep knowledge and deep skill, fix it, and then communicate what you've learned in simple terms to others, so that others who can only specialize in one thing at least can do approximately right things in the areas that you have explored deeply. So CS, design their all superpowers, pick one, be good at it.
So to the students in the room, this talk feels kind of like a call to action or something, right? It's go make better interfaces, go make better, more accessible systems for people. And I was wondering if, to me as a web designer, mobile designer, it feels like a lot of this stuff needs to happen at the OS level, right? You need OS level things that are gonna, change interfaces that are gonna, make every Mac or every iPhone more accessible. But have you reached out to companies like Apple or Microsoft? I mean, do you see them on this trajectory at all? I mean, Apple has some accessibility features, but it seems like these would be a lot more, right?
Yeah, I've talked to some people, but for another few years, my reach is not very big. Bill Gates doesn't yet listen to me. But you are right. We have to essentially rethink our entire software engineering stack. So we have recently done it with respect to security. When we first started writing programs as computer scientists, we didn't think about security at all. And then later on, when we tried to go back and patch those programs, it was nearly impossible. So over the past 15 years, we rewrote our operating systems, we rewrote our tools to make security a little bit easier, and now it's a little bit more pervasive. It's still not perfect, but it's becoming to be part of the mainstream software engineering practice. So part of my call to action today is, let's do the same for accessibility. Let's figure out the right abstractions that put them throughout the software engineering stack.
So I guess a brief follow-up to that. If you're a CEO of a Fortune 500 in tech, security is an easy one, right? You say like, oh, people are going to lose all their credit card information. Like, obviously we have to fix that. And if we have to change our entire software engineering stack to fix that, it seems reasonable. But design, it feels hard for me to see it from like the CEO's perspective, right? Like how many, like what would you say if you're talking to like, who's CEO of Apple now? Tim Cook? Yeah.
So you assume that CEOs are heartless, evil people.
No, I'm saying they're responsible to the shareholders, and the shareholders want to, profit above all else.
Well, this is also changing, right? So we now legally recognize for-benefit corporations rather than just for-profit and non-profit. So we've got this new entity. It's now possible and fashionable to create corporations that not only seek money but also change in the world. So I think it's now becoming legally possible to be good. I'm also incredibly gratified to see recent surveys about millennials. So my generation, apparently when we were surveyed and asked what we look at when we choose employers, it was money. It was the first thing. People in the generation that is now going on the job market say opportunity to grow, opportunity to have impact, opportunity to have meaning. So I think something good is happening in the world. I think we're going to have a new breed of CEOs who will say, of course, equitable access, of course, like why not? So I think good things are coming.
Thanks.
Well, that was great. Thank you again. And thank you guys for coming too.